Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an
The
atheist.
fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
For those of you who can't relate to what it was like being a child growing up in a devoutly religious home in the 70s, I can only tell you what it was like from my experience, and that is everywhere we went, when the month of October would roll around, in subtle ways and sometimes not so subtle ways, we would be warned about Halloween. In fact, there were whole seminars done on the origins of Halloween and the evil occult practices that take place, and you know, lock up your animals. They might be grabbed by some rogue element and sacrificed. I mean, all of the worst case scenarios that you can possibly imagine. And then they would tell us that, if you're going to celebrate, we're going to celebrate the Lord's way. And it seemed to be a holiday that the parents were just sort of ready to get past. They knew with kids, they probably were going to have to do something. So they allowed us to dress up as relatively benign characters. We weren't able to do, devils and witches and any of that stuff. I don't think even vampires were allowed. Nothing with blood. It was all Bible characters and clowns, and the girls got to be fairies and princesses and whatnot, and that was pretty much it. We'd go to a very safe place, some party somewhere, and then once the Halloween holiday was over, everybody breathed a sigh of relief. Whew! Now we can get on with Thanksgiving and Christmas. Now we can get on with the family stuff. Halloween, Satan's Day, is behind us. Which tells you how much research they have done into their holidays. Obviously, the Christmas holiday is just loaded with pagan ritual. It's just loaded with stuff that has nothing to do with Christ. And we recently did a podcast that spent about 90 minutes where we talked about Halloween and told ghost stories. And it was a nice break for me. We've had a wonderful year, and many people said they loved hearing the stories and they loved celebrating Halloween. A few people totally hated the show, wondered why in the world a free thinker, a skeptic, an atheist would spend 90 minutes talking about the supernatural. And the answer is that I just needed something different. We did so many heavy topics this year. We talked about Jim Jones and the mass suicide at Jonestown and the cults, and we talked about religion and politics, and that opened up a whole other can of worms. And we talked about grieving without God and the death of loved ones and coping and childhood indoctrination and deconversion stories and people being ostracized from their loved ones and marriages split apart and all these heavy topics, And one thing about the month of October is it gives us a chance to just kind of hit the brakes and breathe. If it's not your bag, I totally understand. This show won't be for you either, as we discuss the origins of Halloween. It was sort of skipped across on the last podcast about how that it would surprise religious people how involved the church has been in the origins of Halloween and how we celebrate it. And so I wanted to take a little time and go a little bit deeper and address that. And if that interests you, you're going to enjoy the next 20, 30 minutes. And if it's not your thing, we'll catch you on the next show. Now, bear with me, because what you're about to hear is the widely accepted history of Halloween, but much of it is in dispute. I mean, the details you're going to hear told and reported differently in different places. And so if something doesn't quite ring true, I'd like to know about it. But what we're presenting here is essentially the generally accepted history, where it came from, what it is, what it does, sourced on multiple levels. The traditions really evolve differently in different parts of the world and different times and different years for different reasons. So those nuances do exist in the story. Don't freak out if something I say isn't exactly what you have heard or read. 2,000 years ago, in what is now Ireland and the UK and northern France, the Celtic people, they celebrated New Year's not on January 1st. They celebrated it November the 1st. That day essentially for them marked the end of the summer and the beginning of the winter. And the days would get shorter. The night would have dominion over the sunlight, and the season of the harvest was over. Now, they were a very superstitious culture, very superstitious. And it's pronounced Samhain, but pronounced Samhain. It's spelled Samhain. Now, I said Samhain for many years and continue to slip because I had read it for so long before I had seen the pronunciation. I think Samhain sounds better, but Samhain, Samhain, whatever, was the Lord of Darkness. And it was said in the Celtic culture that he would have dominion of the earth during the long winter. It was his season. November 1st started the season of the Lord of Darkness, Samhain. By the way, Samhain translates to read end of summer. The Celts also believed that on the night before the new year, there was a merging of the living world with the world of the dead. The two planes crossed, and the Celts believed those who had died the previous year would rise up out of their graves, and they would walk the earth on their travels toward the afterlife. Now, some of these spirits were benevolent and friendly and good and happy, and others were not. They damaged crops, and they caused general mischief among the living. Also, among all the dead people who had risen were other spiritual creatures like fairies and demons. And to protect themselves, gifts and treats were left outside of houses to pacify any evil rogue spirits, any mischievous spirits, and as sort of a sacrifice to ensure a bountiful harvest for the following year. And it was believed on this night, before the new year, the day before November 1st, as the spirits roamed, Lord Samhain, Lord of Darkness, would eventually appear and lead the spirits down to the underworld, to the afterlife. Now, the celebration of Samhain also held that this intermingling of the physical and the spirit world was a very special time which would enable the Celtic priests, called the Druids, to prophesy about the future. It's weird. They could actually see into the spirit realm on this one night. And so as they built bonfires and sacrificed animals, they would make this big production out of being able to look into the years and decades and centuries ahead and prophesy about the future. The Celts would dress up in costumes. They were made out of animal heads and animal skins, partly to confuse the spirits. They didn't want to become possessed by anything evil. They wanted protection. So to trick the spirits, they would dress up in costume. And they wanted to frighten them off, right? Also, many Celts wore costumes representing dead ancestors. They honored the dead. Those in costume are believed to have gone from house to house, performing outrageous and silly acts, and in exchange, the homeowners would give them food and drink. Sounds much like our modern-day trick-or-treat practice. And as the festival of Samhain continued well into the night, and these Celts partied hard, as I understand it, they partied hard. They appeased the spirits, and they were preparing for the winter months ahead, the season of Samhain. And let's jump ahead on the timeline, all right? Almost a couple thousand years. By 43 AD, the Celts had largely been conquered by the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire co-opted many of the original Celtic traditions into the Catholic feast of All Martyrs' Day. Now, All Martyrs' Day was originally celebrated mid-May, but Pope Gregory III moved All Martyrs' Day to November 1st. It was called All Hallows or All Hallowmas, translating All Saints' Day. And therefore, the night before was called All Hallows' Eve. Yeah, Halloween. The name Halloween was a creation of the church, folks. By the 9th century, the Catholic Church had designated the next day, November 2nd, as All Souls Day. They were trying to get people out of the pagan practices they loved so much in their culture, and they were trying to co-opt them into instead celebrating All Souls Day, and they implemented many of the early Celtic practices, which honored the dead with bonfires and costumes. Early Christians would echo the tradition of trick or treat as they went from village to village, souling, begging for what they called soul cakes, which were square pieces of bread. And the more soul cakes they received, well, in return, the more prayers they would offer up on behalf of the dead relatives of the homeowners. It was believed the prayers could help those who were passed on, who were deceased and in limbo, to earn passage into heaven. Does that sound Catholic to you? You betcha. In Scotland in the late 1800s, there are records about something called guising, where people in costume would go door to door to be rewarded with cakes and fruit and money. Right here in the United States, the earliest written record of the term trick or treat appeared in the 1920s. References made to the tricks performed if no treats were given, most of them pretty benign. A trick or treat, as we know it, didn't really become firmly established in American culture until the mid-1950s. Walt Disney put it in a cartoon called Trick or Treat. What else? And there were TV shows, the classic Ozzie and Harriet and others, that featured trick or treaters. And then the practice really took off. The traditions of Halloween have evolved from culture to culture throughout the century. European immigrants brought Halloween to the U.S., exploding in popularity in the 1800s. And of course, we see where it's at today. So where did many of our other Halloween traditions come from? Well, I did some checking, and they make for very interesting reading. For example, there are accounts of an ancient Roman tradition that was related to the worship of Pomona, the goddess of the harvest. Pomona's sacred fruit was the apple, and some say that bobbing for apples originated there. There's a British author, his name is W.H. Davenport Adams. He wrote about a game dating back a few hundred years in the British Isles. He wrote a book in 1902 called The Curiosities of Superstition, and he talks about a game where apples were thrown into a tub of water, and you catch one with your mouth, and you peel it carefully, and you pass the long strip of peel, you pass it around your head several times, and then you throw it over your shoulder. And according to legend or superstition, it says the apple peel will fall to the ground and supposedly make the shape of the first letter of the name of your true love. Check this out. Irish kids used to carve out potatoes or turnips and light them on Halloween in commemoration of an Irish blacksmith named Jack. Now, the legend of Jack says that he tricked the devil twice out of claiming his soul. He was too wicked for heaven, and he wasn't wanted in hell, so the man was instead cursed to wander the earth endlessly in search of respite. And when he asked Satan for a light to find his way, the devil threw up from the fires of hell a live coal, which the man placed into a hollowed-out shell of a turnip he'd been eating, and he used it as a lamp. That man's name was Jack. His legend gave birth to the tradition we now call the jack-o'-lantern. By the way, it was when Irish immigrants came to America, they discovered the pumpkin. They discovered it made a much better jack-o'-lantern than turnips and hollowed-out potatoes, and so that tradition evolved. What are pumpkins anyway? You see them all the time this time of year. Well, it's a member of the gourd family, native to Central America, found on 6 continents. Apparently, in 1584, French explorer Jacques Cartier, exploring the St. Lawrence region of North America, he discovered something he called gros melons, translated into English as pompillon, a name which has since evolved into our modern word pumpkin. I can't do French. I can't do any accent other than redneck. I'm sorry. By the way, do you know that pumpkins are actually pretty good for you? I mean, they're low-cal, low-fat, low-sodium, high-fiber, lots of vitamin A, B, potassium, protein, iron. Who knew? Unless, of course, you're making pumpkin pie. Well, that integrates a whole bunch of other elements. The largest pumpkin pie ever made, check it out. The current record goes to the New Bremen Giant Pumpkin Growers in New Bremen, Ohio. 20 feet across this pie was. 3,699 pounds. The recipe for the pumpkin pie required 1,200 pounds of canned pumpkin. 2,796 eggs, 109 gallons of evaporated milk, 525 pounds of sugar, 7 pounds of salt, and 14 pounds of cinnamon. Is Halloween detrimental? Is it evil? Is it demonic? Is it damaging? There's no surprise that the church thinks so. ChristianAnswers.net, always an entertaining site, laments that Halloween glorifies the darkness of the world instead of Jesus Christ. One of the many religious sites and organizations out there that encourage believers to just avoid it. Avoid these pagan celebrations of the occult altogether. Teach the child to defy evil and prepare themselves for spiritual warfare. To follow the command of Ephesians 6:12, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. But while ChristianAnswers.net and some others recommend avoiding any celebrating of October 31st, other ministries promote Halloween alternatives. Instead of vampires and devils and witches and ghosts and spooks and scares, they provide parties with Bible themes. They encourage children to dress up as Jesus or Moses or Noah, one of the apostles, whatever. They play games, they have music, they do hay rides. There's a website called fishersofkids.com. They pitch what they call harvest parties, complete with face painting and carnival games and a walk-through maze. UMC.org, the website of the United Methodist Church, they recommend a reverse trick-or-treat. What they do is they have church members visit homes to pass out candy to homeowners, right? They're not getting the candy, they're giving it away, and also inviting them to Sunday church. It's a great way to evangelize. A great many churches provide an alternative to the sometimes scary practice of going to strangers' houses for candy, instead doing something called trunk or treat. It's actually a pretty good idea for those who don't know their neighbors or neighborhoods well. People will decorate their cars, and they park them in the church parking lot or wherever, and they fill the trunks with candy, and the kids dressed in non-scary costumes can just go. They go from car to car, trunk to trunk, and they reach in and get handfuls of sweets. It's a lot of fun. Some churches take a darker approach to Halloween with a phenomenon known as the Hell House. We talked about this a little bit on the previous podcast. Essentially, they're like haunted houses. But instead of rattling chains and witches and movie monsters and chainsaws and all that, they attempt to depict the horrors found in the real world. Hell houses became popular in the 1990s. Now you can find them pretty much across America. They're all over the place. Sometimes called other things. You can call them Judgment House or something like that, Satan's house, whatever gets people in the door. But almost all have a deal where you walk through the dark and a violent path is presented before you, a path of a world without Jesus. There's a girl who has an abortion. They're wheeling around on a bloody gurney. A guy overdoses on heroin. There's a school shooting, a cult activity. A depressed teenager commits suicide, sticks a gun to the mouth. Boom. Gang violence, car accidents, demons. And quite often, inside a hell house, you walk through a sea of writhing and screaming bodies tormented in the fires of hell. And at the end, hell houses will often depict a bloody, beaten Christ figure hanging on the cross. And as you exit, you are pretty rattled and you are met with church counselors and the message that only salvation through Jesus Christ can save you from the horror of eternal hell. Would you like to accept Jesus as your personal Savior? Come with us. There's a guy named George Ratliff did a documentary on the phenomenon of the Hell House. If you want a genuine taste of what people encounter inside these things, they have a trailer on the website, and it's worth 5 minutes to go watch it. Go to hellhousemovie.com. hellhousemovie.com, and I believe they have a trailer tab. And you'll be offended by what they do to children on a day that's supposed to be fun. So are people heeding the warnings? Are they casting off this wicked, evil day? Not so much. Halloween is the second most popular holiday in America. It's right behind Christmas. Almost $6 billion a year in sales from costumes and candy and decorations, greeting cards. The average American family spends about $300 on Halloween. The U.S. Census Bureau says that more than 36 million kids go trick-or-treating. 36 million! According to USA Today, the top children's costumes are the princess, the witch, Spider-Man, and pirates. By the way, on this holiday, the adults get to have just as much, if not more, fun as the kids, their favorite costumes being witches, pirates, vampires, zombies, and Batman. And even the pets get to dress up, and I have been guilty of this. You see dogs dress out as devils, bees, ghosts, pumpkins. There's a hot dog costume. They actually have the little mustard and ketchup on the back. It's priceless. I had Great Danes for a couple of years. And one year, I had them for a decade, but we took them out on Halloween for a couple of years. And one year, we dressed my nephew up as Zorro. We put him in a little Zorro costume, and we put saddles on the Great Danes. And then we had my little niece in like a maiden costume. So it was Zorro and the maiden and his trusty steed. we went door to door. And it was the most fun. We took pictures. It was amazing. And there's some wild costumes out there. Wild stuff, fun stuff, sometimes naughty stuff. You just never know. The guy with the alien bursting out of his chest, that's a classic ever since the Ridley Scott film. The Devil's Advocate. There's a costume where the guy who just walks around with a sign that says, "Vote for the devil." He's the Devil's Advocate. The Land Shark. That's famous from Saturday Night Live. The guy who pins a dollar bill to each earlobe and tells everybody he's a buccaneer. Bam! The prison inmate wearing the orange jumpsuit that says Department of Erections. The parent in a chef's hat, walking around carrying a cooking pot, holding their young child inside the pot, and the child is wearing a lobster costume. The guy wearing the potato costume, and there's a Star Wars helmet on his head. He calls himself Darth Tater. The woman wearing a large paper bag that says "Good in the sack." The hula girl, the Joker, the priest, the nun, the zombie, the circus freak, the crash test dummy, Lindsay Lohan. You just never know what you're going to see when you answer the door. If you're a diehard fan of Halloween this year, by the way, totally awesome and totally evil rock legend Alice Cooper has launched his own theme park ride as part of Universal Studios' Halloween extravaganza in Los Angeles. It's called Welcome to My Nightmare, and I think it just opened like 3-4 weeks ago. It's a haunted maze with guillotine decapitations and electric chairs and an insane asylum and predatory snakes and this giant black widow spider. And if you can't get near LA, there are attractions all over the country. Visit one of a myriad of other places like the Queen Mary, the haunted 12-deck ocean liner in Long Beach. They say it's haunted. Walk the Hangman's House of Horrors, a haunted funhouse in Fort Worth, Texas. You can check into the Bates Motel in Glen Mills, Pennsylvania. It was made famous by the classic Hitchcock film Psycho. It's actually a recreation. You can beware of the Headless Horseman in Hayride in Ulster Park, New York. Get committed to the Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. 5 haunted houses on 11 acres. How much fun would that be? Or you can get an education in terror at the Dent Haunted Schoolhouse in Cincinnati, Ohio, where apparently the ghost of a murderous janitor walks the hall. This time of year, Halloween is pretty much everywhere, and it's harmless. Halloween's harmless, and it's fun. In a world with so much real-life terror in our real-world headlines, there's so much division, uncertainty, and strife, and oppression, and conflict, the rogue dictators, and the terror plots, and the street crime, the domestic abuse, the economy, natural disasters, man-made disasters, the uncertainty of the future, blah, blah, blah. Look, don't let anybody steal from you the joy of the escape into the frivolous spooks and scares of a perfectly enjoyable Halloween. Don your Phantom's mask and steal away with the lovely Christine. Transform into the Wolfman. Stir your witch's brew, bare your claws, flap your wings, hide in a leaf pile, jump out, scare the crap out of the neighbor kids. It's awesome. Decorate your yard with tombstones. Put a fake rubber rat in the beer cooler. Hide in the closet. Do whatever. Be scary. Be funny. Be unusual. Be gross, be uninhibited and unashamed as you embrace the tricks and treats of this All Hallows Eve. And if somebody warns you about celebrating such an evil, wicked day, just look at them and smile and remind them that it's the eve of All Saints' Day, courtesy of the Pope. And remind him the holiday promotes good stuff, laughter, community, friendship, and giving good things to total strangers. Lots of giving going on Halloween. And finally, you might remind them if they want to be truly scared, well, they can do that any time of year by visiting the Creation Museum in Petersburg, Kentucky. That place will give you the chills. To you and yours, a safe, happy, and extremely spooky Halloween. Thanks for listening.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.